Okay, so we got a lot to go over today. Now, as we do this here, I'm going to need everybody's kind of help here. So what we're going to cover today is sort of going to start getting to the deepest recesses of our logical and sort of philosophical thinking. Okay? What we're doing is we're trying to establish what's called theism, and we're going to get into this here in a second. What we are trying to show is that someone or something who Paul, we're going to see, calls God, has created creation. That's what we're trying to do here. Now, to begin our lesson, let's go ahead and begin in the book of Acts chapter 17. Let's start there. This is good timing. Come on, ladies. And ladies, we'll be in Acts 17 to begin. We just started. So as you turn there, we're talking about the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul was going through his missionary journeys, right? He's going around his mission and he is spreading the gospel. And if you notice in Acts chapter 17, if you look at verse 1, Paul is going to be in Thessalonica here. And it says, when they had traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And according to Paul's custom, every time Paul went into a different city, when he's preaching the gospel, he always went to the synagogue, as was his custom. He went to them, and for 3 Sabbaths, what did Paul do? It says he reasoned with them. Does anybody have a different word in their translation? In verse number 2, any other word different than reasoned?
It said engaged in discussion in the Amplified.
Engaged in discussion.
Amplifier.
Yeah, actually the Amplified version. Okay? So Paul, in order to appeal to the truth about Christ in the synagogues, what did he use? He used reason. He reasoned with them. Go to verse 17 of the same chapter. Paul's traveling through all these places. He goes to Berea. He's going to go to Athens here. Look at verse 17. It says, well, start verse 16. Now, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was being provoked within him as he was observing the city full of idols. So he was reasoning in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be present. Go to chapter 18. Look at verse 4. And he was reasoning in the synagogue every Sabbath and trying to persuade the Jews and the Greeks. Look at verse 5. But when Silas and Timothy came down to Macedonia, Paul began devoting himself completely to the word, solemnly testifying to the Jews and that Jesus was the Christ. What is Paul using to testify?
The Old Testament.
The Old Testament. And what is he appealing to? He's appealing to their reason. Look at verse 19 of chapter 18. Paul goes to Ephesus, and when they came to Ephesus and he left them there, now he himself entered the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. Look at chapter 19, verse 8. And he entered a synagogue and continued speaking out boldly for 3 months, reasoning and persuading them about the kingdom of God. But when some were becoming hardened and disobedient, speaking evil of the way before the people, he withdrew from them and took the disciples, reasoning daily in the school of Tyrannus. What do we see as the common thread here? What is repeated over and over in these chapters as Paul goes about his missionary journey and he's spreading the truth about Christ? What is Paul appealing to? Is he appealing to their emotions? Reason. He's not appealing to their feelings. He's appealing to their reason. That word reason, dialegomai, it means to dialect or to speak through logic. So Paul, when he is giving the objective truths of Christianity, which we briefly talked about last week, in this particular case, Christ as Lord. That's what he's appealing to, right? That's what he's talking about. That's the objective truth that Paul is going around talking about, which is that Christ is Lord. What does he appeal to? Reason, not emotion, not feelings, nothing else but the scripture, and he appeals to their reason. Very important to understand. Paul has never, ever espoused a blind faith. He never does, not one time. He never encourages what's called credulity. Credulity means that you are just going to willfully and flippantly believe anything you hear because it sounds good. That's credulity. Paul never espouses credulity. What does Paul espouse? Use your reason to believe in the truth about Jesus Christ. He never espouses that. Now, one of the ways that Paul espouses reason, Paul goes through reason. Hey, Peyton. So we're just talking about Paul here. The Apostle Paul, as he makes his missionary journey, he says over and over and over again, he appeals to their reason. And one of the ways that Paul appeals to our reason is through what's called natural theology. Okay, this is what we're going to get into today. So when Paul says, use your reason to believe the objective truths of Christ, one of those reasons that Paul appeals to is through what's called natural theology. The base argument that Paul makes to believe in Christ is natural theology. And this is where we are going to begin our apologetic task, with natural theology. And the reason we begin here, this is very important to understand. The reason we begin here is because everybody can start here. Okay? The only prerequisite for understanding natural theology is that you yourself you have fealty to logic and reason. That's the only prerequisite. You only have to admit that you are going to have fidelity to logic and reason. That's why we start here at natural theology. Okay? Now, let's look at this word real quick. These two words, natural theology. This is going to be important. Theos in the Greek. That's where we get the word God, right? This is where we get theology. Theos, theology, God. So ology is, as we talked about last week, is the study of or the knowledge of. So theology is the study and knowledge of who? God. Okay? Natural here, that word natural and natural theology, that word, it means nature or creation. Okay? This is going to be very important. Nature or creation. That's what this word means. So when you put these two words together, what does this word mean? It means the knowledge of God through what? Creation. Okay? That's what these two words mean. Natural theology is the knowledge or the study of God through creation, what we see. Okay? So in that case, sometimes what you don't see. Okay? But anything that has come into existence is part of creation. Now, here's what we have to understand. This is so important to our argument, and especially to Paul's argument. The creator of the universe has never made it a point to hide himself from us. Never. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. God is the creator, and in his common mercy, what he has done for everybody is he has at least made himself plainly and easily known. He's never wanted to hide himself from his creation. And I think we all know where we're going here. Let's go to Romans 1. So remember, Paul is appealing to reason in Acts. And here in the book of Romans, here is where Paul is going to begin his appeal of natural theology and reason. And that begins with understanding that God, the creator, whoever that God is, we haven't established that yet, but whoever this God is, his existence is so plainly known that if you deny him, it is a willful, disobedient act. You're going to see this here. So Romans 1. Here's where Paul appeals to reason. Look at start in verse 18. Paul says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." Verse 19. "Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God has made it evident to them." Here it is, verse 20. "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through that which is made, so that they are without" what? Excuse. What's Paul saying here? Paul's saying that the creator, whoever that is. Paul's going to make an appeal of who that is. But Paul is, from a base argument, the lowest argument you can make, Paul is making a case for theism in creation. And what he's saying is that God has made himself, his existence, so overtly, plainly evident that to deny him requires what? Well, back in Acts, you don't have to go there, but back in Acts 19, we read just a minute ago where it said that once Paul was making the argument, those that rejected the truth, they hardened their hearts and they disobeyed it. God has made his existence so obvious that to reject the truth requires a willful hardening of the heart and a willful disobedience to reasonable truth. Because in verse 20, Paul says, from creation, that which has come into being, everything that can be known about God, not specifically Christ, we're going to talk about that in a second, but God's existence in general can be known just by what you're looking at creation. It's so overt that even though we've never seen God, Paul says you know that his invisible attributes, particularly his eternal power and his divine nature, can be known just by observing creation, just by looking at each one of us. We know that God's existence is clearly evident. But here's where it gets even harder, or even worse, for those that deny. Not only can his attributes be known through creation, they've been clearly seen. And the further indictment, they're understood, it says. God's existence is clearly known because it's clearly seen and it's clearly understood, right? So what's Paul saying? That if you reject Christ, what are you abandoning? What are you disobeying? You're disobeying reason and logic. This is why you are without excuse. The one thing you will never be able to say on your day of judgment is, I didn't know. Because God is so unavoidably evident, by the way, it's unavoidable. It's unavoidably evident because his existence and his divine attributes of power and his nature are so unavoidably present. You literally cannot say, I never knew. No one ever told me. You're without excuse. So to deny the existence of God is what? It's irrational. It's unreasonable. It is not the logical choice when looking at the evidence. That's what logic is. What's the natural, what's the logical, the rational choice when you weigh the evidence? Well, Paul says the natural and reasonable response to seeing the evidence is believing that God does exist. So we have to understand that God has never made it a point to hide himself from his creation. In fact, it's the exact opposite. And to deny him requires a willful act of disobedience. That's why the psalmist says in Psalm 14:1 that those who deny the existence of God are called what? Fools. The only prerequisite for denying the existence of God is foolishness, because you're abandoning reason. And this is what Paul's saying. You're abandoning logic. You're abandoning rationality. So, the knowledge of God is unavoidable. This is what Paul is appealing to. You cannot deny him. Now, this is what's called natural theology. Romans 1 here, verses 18 to 20, is the base of our natural theology. What can be known about God by looking at creation? And it's to the point where it's so clear that we cannot deny the existence of God. That is natural theology, okay? Are there any questions on natural theology before we move on? Anybody want to add anything to natural theology?
Those great men supposedly who are like evolutionists, right?
Yep.
It's great scientists. They're well years on stuff and traditional. So I guess with them, it's just like you said, it's a willing hardening of the heart, because to them, they know too, right? Deep inside, it's not evolution, it's God.
That's right.
But they have this lengthy discourse on, no, here's how it really happened, and there is no God. But it's actually worse for them.
It is. You're exactly right, because what we're going to see here just in a little bit is, in order for them to believe what they believe, they have to violate all the laws of physics and the laws of nature that govern their entire profession. There's no other way. And again, we're going to show this explicitly. In order to not believe there's a God, this is why Paul makes this clear. To reject God requires willful disobedience to reason. This is exactly what Paul's whole argument is. In the whole book of Acts, he appeals to their reason. And then he goes on to Romans and say, listen, it's so reasonable to believe in him that to reject him is willful, illogical thought. That's exactly Paul's point. So yes, this is exactly right.
And to kind of her point, it's a religion. Because you have to get up to
Yeah.
these things where you've lost reason.
It's right.
Choosing to believe like the Big Bang.
Yes.
Things from nothing. So, okay, if you can get them reasonable to go, well, you're believing in something so it's religion.
And you see how you have to sort of manipulate things and data just to get it to fit, because they're trying to fit that proverbial square peg in a round hole. It doesn't work.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say it takes too much faith to be made.
It does. Because to your point, that's such a big point. This is the indictment on Christianity, that our faith is blind and illogical, but it's not. Paul makes it very clear. It's actually the most reasonable response. Their faith is actually not faith, because our faith is based on what? What we see, and logic and the laws that govern creation. Theirs is the opposite. Theirs isn't faith. Theirs is plain credulity, right? Good point. Andrew.
Well, I was going to say that in referring back to the idea of bending logic, bending reason, they start with nothing, but it's not really nothing. They posit.
They argue that. It's right.
They posit nothing is this or it's that. It have to have these components.
Yeah.
So nothing becomes something, which is in itself incoherent.
That's exactly right. So you kind of start seeing where all this is going here. Because in natural theology, part of natural theology are the laws and physics that govern creation. We're going to cover that here. Part of all of natural theology is we live according to certain laws. Laws of nature, right? Gravity kind of thing. There are laws to what govern creation, and we see them every day. We just may not realize it. But part of natural theology is when you look at natural theology, the only way to deduce that God doesn't exist is a willful disobedience. That's important to remember, because those that stand judgment on that day, like Stephen Hawking, when he stands judgment, he flat out denied the existence of God. So how smart is he really? It's actually illogical, right? It's a willful disobedience.
He didn't believe that he's wicked. He
No.
doesn't believe that he's unreasonable. But different ways to reject.
Yeah, anyway, that's right.
Could be arrogant.
You end up in the same hell regardless.
Yeah.
Right. That's one of the difficulties when you talk to people. Obviously it's true. They are willfully denying it. But that willful denial is such a deep-seated, internalized perversion of reason that they don't realize they're doing it.
Right.
That's right.
Which I mean that goes to God having to eliminate them to see,
Yeah.
reveal to them their spiritual darkness.
Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, God. I was thinking it's obviously just a coping mechanism. It's one answer of why they believe what they believe. They don't want to admit it. Ultimately, all their actions are going to be judged at the end. They don't want to believe there's an ultimate judge up there and jury by that logic that will pull their entire lives, all their greed and all their sins into
That's right.
one pile.
Well, to be fair to people like that, because you made up a good point, the people that struggle with this are not those that overtly reject Christ. There are people who genuinely want to believe, who struggle with why they should believe, right? There are many people that will say, well, I want to believe. I remember on MacArthur did that Larry King episode. Larry King makes, I want to believe, I just can't. It doesn't make sense to me. There are people who struggle with it, who want to believe, or there might be even some Christians that say, well, I struggle with my faith. Am I supposed to believe? If is what I believe logical? There are people out there that do that all the time. So this is why I mentioned last week, the goal for me here is I don't want you guys to go out there and start picking fights and winning arguments. That's not the goal of this. I want you guys to understand, all of us to understand, that what we believe is on the side of reason and rationality and logic. That's the most important thing. Bless you. Hey, Dave, you're going to say something.
Well, what I was just going to say is that sometimes the attitude is very much like the man who calls himself a self-made man. The aim is to vaunt himself and to puff himself up. Pride it's the guy in the lead car of the parade. It is the biggest sin. What's called in Jeremiah is it's the chief of sins. But ultimately, what man wants to do is man wants to make everything about himself. So in being an atheist or an evolutionist, it's this man-centered kind of ideology that's going to put himself, like, I climbed up out of the slime myself, my ancestors did, and they were a fish and they climbed up on the shore, and we made ourselves and we became what we are because we're the better edge of evolution. So we've progressed this far. Look at us. Got it. So it diminishes God and it vaunts man.
Got it. Good point.
So they worship the creation.
The creation.
The creation and created, exactly.
And that's a perfect segue into our next part. Because when you look at this, when we begin the apologetic task, okay, I think we can all agree that we're going to start here, right? Because if you acknowledge this, we touched on this last week, if you would acknowledge that creation, universe, does not exist, we got big problems, okay? We can at least agree that it does exist, because immediately, if you agree it doesn't exist, you're now absurd. There's just no other way around that, okay? But I would imagine we can all start here, okay? This is where most people, if not almost everybody, who maintains logic. Remember, the only prerequisite to this is that you yourself maintain logic. Logically speaking, creation does exist, right? This is why we start here, okay? Because everybody can agree creation does exist. But here's where people usually, oftentimes start to depart. Do we believe that creation does exist, but creation is uncaused, or creation is caused? This is usually where the debate begins, in these two things, okay? Is creation caused or uncaused? Usually people fall, not always, but usually people fall into one of two sides. For those that believe that creation was uncaused, they believe that creation is self-existent. But here's the kicker. This is very important to understand. They believe that the effects of creation have no what? Cause. They believe that the universe just always existed, that it has no beginning. And because it has no beginning, it never came into existence. Therefore, the effects of creation have no cause. You're going to find out extraordinarily quickly that this is a one-way ticket where? To absurdity. You'll find out why. You'll see why here. Now, for those that believe, like us, that the universe is caused, here's where we also split. We believe the universe is caused, and you'll see why. But do you believe that the universe came from nothing? Kind of Hillary's point. Do you believe that it came from nothing? Do you believe that the universe is caused, exists, but it created itself? It's kind of what Andrew was just talking about. They have to make nothing into something. This is where the basis of atheism or atheism. Atheism, is the negation, right? Atheism means without theism. Amorality means without morality. So anytime you see an there, just put the word not or no or none. So do you believe that, yes, okay, I agree, creation exists, and I believe that it was caused, but I believe it was caused ultimately from nothing because creation created itself. Now, believe it or not, this is a very popular view. This is the Stephen Hawking view, the quantum theory view. They believe that the creation created itself from nothing. Of the many theories, it falls under this. Again, this is the basis of atheism, and you're going to find out exceedingly quickly it's a one-way ticket to absurdity. Now, we believe that the universe does exist. We believe it was caused, but we certainly don't believe it was caused from nothing, because you'll see very quickly that's illogical. We believe it was caused from something. So what's our apologetic task? What do we want to establish? Theism. What does the mean? God. What does ism mean? The belief. We want to establish not atheism, but theism. And how do we establish theism? Through natural theology. Okay? Natural theology has three elements to it, three parts to its argument. We have the cosmological argument, and the cosmological argument argues creation. It argues theism from the element of physical creation and its laws. This is what we're looking at today. Okay? Cosmological argument, cosmos means universe, means creation, right? It's arguing the existence of God, theism, from physical creation, remember that which we can see, and its laws, gravity, the law of causality, right? All these physical principles, these metaphysical principles that exist. The second one, which we'll cover next week, is what's called the teleological argument. This is a design of complexity. This is the argument from complex design. Look at the human eye, for example. Why is it we cannot figure it out? As advanced as we are, why can we not figure out the simple human eye? Why can we not figure out the human body? There are so many things from complex design that in order to have this complexity, it requires what? A designer. Third one we're going to look at.
That's why the ancients still go with exceedingly extensive, great lengths of time, billions and billions of years, because they even know in themselves, in the back of their minds, that it's absurd to think that. So maybe it did, but it just takes a whole lot of chain of acts
Sure.
for billions and billions of years, and then poof, you end up with lightning and flash.
That's right. Yeah. And the third one we're going to argue is morality. So the ontological argument, which we talked about last week, will fit in here. But the third one we're going to look at is the moral element. Objective morality exists, does it not? Nobody would disagree with that. Again, if you're being logical and reasonable, you would understand that everybody has a moral compass to some degree. How did it get there? If objective morality exists, why do we not have a moral giver? Because logically, we must have one. And you'll see why here. So what we're going to look at today is the cosmological argument of natural theology to establish theism, to show that something logically must have caused the existence to come into existence. And the way the cosmological argument identifies itself, what it argues, the cosmological argument, it argues physical creation and its laws, specifically creation, on the note of contingency and causality. Okay? And you guys actually, believe it or not, already know all this. You just probably don't realize it. Okay? So what we're talking about is the cosmological argument of creation through contingency and causality. At this point, is there any questions? Because it's going to get a little deeper here. Does everybody understand what we're arguing and why we're arguing it? Okay, so let's look at the cosmological argument, which is physical creation through contingency and causality. Let's start with contingency. The cosmological argument through contingency. Can we all agree that something exists? We would agree. If you're being reasonable, you would agree some things exist. Do we not exist? Yes, we do. So we have that. Now here's where I need your help. I want you all to name me something in creation as big as you can think of and as small as you can think of. I'm going to start. Trees. Go.
Cells.
Go. Next one. Atoms. Very good. Love it. If somebody says forks, we're in big trouble. Elephants. Perfect. Chloe? Plant? Oh, very good. Love it. Ben, go ahead.
Would the void and time itself count?
Time. Perfect. Love it.
The
Universe. That's huge. Even bigger. Dave, go ahead.
I don't know, that's everything for, it's about as small as you.
How about Dave? Let's put Dave on there. Okay. Go ahead, Steve. Mustard seed. Next.
Well,
What is it?
well,
Wales.
Whales. Oh, God. I said wells.
The actual words.
Okay. Keep going. What else? Giraffes. Perfect. Paul. I hope I spelled this right. Go ahead, Paul.
I was gonna say self, but you already got Dave.
How about people? Let's do it. Melissa. Love. Love exists. Okay, perfect. Peyton. Hey, all right, I knew you'd say something like that. Okay. I'm going to put objective love. That way it's not a feeling. Okay, so we agree that something exists. What in creation exists? We've just named all these things in creation. Now, here's our next question. Does anything in creation, does it come into being and does it eventually cease to exist? We have to answer that question. Let's start with trees. Do trees come into being? Have they always existed or do they come into being? They come into being, right? And they die, okay? So we know that. What about cells, atoms, elephants, planets? Do those come into being? Yep. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Reproduction.
Reproduction. Okay.
Like copy machine?
Okay, reproduction. Is there anything on this list that does not come into existence and or cease to exist at some point in its life cycle?
People.
The only thing, time, right? All these things at one point come into existence and at one time will cease to end. Okay? So yes, the answer is every one of these things come into existence, they change, they're altered in some way. I am changing, I am altering, I'm also coming to existence and one day will cease to exist in that physical sense. Now, logical question number 4. Is this creation, everything we just mentioned, this is important, is it contingent or is it non-contingent? Is it dependent or is it independent? Contingent means depending on something else. Contingent means that you rely on the external power of something else. Here's what that means. Can a tree create itself? What does a tree require for existence? Water. What else? A seed, soil, sun. So is this tree contingent or non-contingent? Say it. Contingent. It is logically contingent. Why? Because it can't create itself. Go down the line. Cells. Can they create themselves? No. They cannot. They require a host, right? A cell cannot come in and of itself. Atoms, elephants, planets, time, whatever you want. The universe. Let's take this one, for example. This is a big one. Universe. Is the universe contingent or non-contingent? Well, it's contingent, right? Because the universe makes up what? Creation. So is creation contingent or non-contingent? It has to be contingent. Another word for contingency is dependency. We are dependent. Creation is dependent. Dave is dependent. The mustard seed and the whales and the giraffes, people, reproduction, and all molecules are dependent on the power, the external power of something or someone else. We ought to agree with that, right? That's not a biblical principle, right? That's not a religious principle. That is a principle of logic, of laws that we govern, that are governed by us, right? That are governed to us. So we can argue everything in creation exists. We can agree that it all changes, and we can agree that everything, if you can name me one thing in creation that is non-contingent, remember, creation, that's non-contingent, let's have it. Does anybody think of anything in creation? I use the word creation very importantly. Anything in creation that is non-contingent? The answer is there is none. Because nothing in creation is non-contingent. So everything in creation is contingent. Is there any, from a logical perspective and a reasonable perspective, is there any disagreement on this? Can you find anybody that would disagree on this? Logically. No, I don't think so either. So, number 4 is everything is contingent. Everything in creation is contingent. Number 5, here's the question. What is creation contingent upon?
Something greater than itself.
Let's go even finer. What is creation dependent on? A cause. Creation is dependent upon a cause. Why? Because creation is what? Contingent. We don't know who this cause is. We know who it's going to be. We know what does Paul call this contingent cause? God, right? But from a broken down logical perspective, creation is contingent on a cause. Now we're going to argue. You're going to get to that. Yes. Very good. So we're going to get to that. So we're just kind of laying our bricks here. So natural theology is one of the arguments is cosmological arguments. The cosmological argument argues creation from contingency and from causality. Cosmological argument says all things in creation require what? A cause. Why? Because everything in creation is contingent. Now, because creation requires a cause, the law of causality says this, and this is exceedingly important. Here's what the cosmological argument says, that because all creation is contingent, all creation requires a cause, meaning creation is dependent. It relies on the power of something outside of itself. This is important. A tree, a cell, an atom. Take those 3. Can the creation of that tree, can the creation of that cell and the creation of that atom, can its creator come from within itself? Peyton, you're shaking your head. Tell me why. Because you're right, but tell me why. Tell me your logic behind it.
That's going back to the whole something out of nothing.
Something out of nothing. So to his point, if the cause of the tree's existence existed within itself, that means the tree has to have existed before it can create what? Itself. Is that logical or is that illogical? It's illogical. Have we ever observed that ever in nature? To this day, no. So the cosmological argument says that because everything in creation is contingent, and we know that logically, all the causes of that contingent existent must exist outside itself. Because if it didn't, now you're having to change what nothing is. Does that make sense? That's illogical. So you see kind of what we're doing here is you're starting to make it seem, you're starting to understand why something uncaused and self-existent and effects are illogical. We're building that case. So the second part of natural theology is going to be to argue from causality. And the law of causality says this, that every effect must have a cause. It does not say, remember this is vital. It does not say that everything must have a cause. It doesn't say that. It says that every effect must have a cause. Okay? Now, you guys actually know this already. Okay? This law of causality is also called the law of what? See if everybody knows it. What is the law of causality called? Cause and effect. You guys know this. You just may not realize it. So, the law of cause and effect says that every effect must have a cause, not should have a cause. It must have a cause. I'm going to give you an example. This is the one that I liked, okay? Let's say you have a pot of boiling water, okay? It's on a stove. Stove is turned on, and you see a pot of boiling water, okay? What is the effect here? What's the effect that you see? Say it again. Boiling water, that's the effect. So according to the law of causality, remember, this is a real law. This is not a biblical principle. This is not a religious claim. This is a metaphysical principle that we all live by, that the world is governed by. Creation is governed by. So the effect here would be the boiling water. And the word effect here is the word for created or comes into existence.
That requires matter and energy.
Okay, let's go with that. So the effect would be the boiling water, right? The question is, according to the law of causality, every effect has to have a cause. So we know that the effect is the boiling water. What does the boiling water require by law? An effect, which is what? Heat. The flame, right? Now, can the water boil itself? No, that's illogical, is it not? To say that it could, you're now dabbling in the absurd. So the effect requires a cause because the effect came into existence. The water wasn't once boiling, now it is. Now, to prove contingency here, to the law of causality, what happens if you remove the heat? What happens to the cause? Does the cause continue to exist? No. What happens to the water when you remove the cause? Stops. So we can logically then deduce that the effect is dependent on what? The cause. Is this a biblical principle, a religious principle, or is this a physical principle? Have we ever seen anything other than this, ever, in creation? Have we ever seen water boil itself? We have not. We've never seen this, ever. Okay? So what we're looking at here, and you kind of have to remember what we're trying to do. We're trying to show that any view apart from our view is illogical. Okay? The boiling water depends on the heat. You cannot have the effect apart from the cause. Okay? Is there any questions on this so far? Contingency and causality, creation. Is there any questions on that? Anything you want to add before we move on? Okay. So this is not something that we don't see every day, right? We see this idea every single day. You just don't think about it. Okay? Now here's what often comes up. Here's where the argument sort of goes awry for some people. Here's where people get stuck. Is the cause here is the heat. Because the effect is dependent on the cause, would we say that the cause is unnecessary or the cause is necessary? Say it. Necessary. Why do we say that it's necessary?
You employ physical laws that there's rules in place that they must follow through.
So it's necessary. Why? Because without it, what doesn't exist? The effect. It's impossible. right? I'm not saying that. The Bible's not saying that. Religion isn't saying that. What we see in creation says that. This is the cosmological argument. This is natural theology. God, the existence of God can be known because we see this. So what we've just argued is the necessity of the someone who creates existence, who caused existence, right? Because the effects of creation are necessary on what? A cause. Questions on that? So we've already argued for contingency, we've argued for causality, and we've argued for necessity. That's what we've argued for. So when you look back, when we establish our natural theology, the cosmological argument says that every effect must have a what? Cause. So therefore, creation cannot exist apart from what? A cause. We know that creation has to be caused, but what we just found out through the law of causality is that every effect is contingent on a necessary cause. This is where we begin to establish the someone or something that has caused creation to exist. So God is very necessary. But here's where we sort of get stuck. This is where a lot of people get stuck. If we're going to go, this is what a lot of people say. If you have a cell, what caused that cell? Because remember, cell is an effect, right? Cell is an effect. It came into existence. So they're going to argue, well, what caused the cell? Tell me what causes cells. Let's call it a host. Okay? Let's go back further. What caused the host? Let's say it's parents. Okay? What caused the parents? Their parents. On and on and on. What caused the earth? You can go back as far as you want. God did. This is our argument. You see how you can just go back further and further and further until eventually you get to the question. If the host caused the cell and their parents caused them and the earth caused them and God caused the earth, who caused God? Okay? You see, the argument can go back in what's called infinite regress, where you can go back, who caused God? Well, another God. Who caused that God? And who caused that God? You see, the argument can keep going back. This is where they take us. But here's the problem. There's a fundamental misunderstanding, which Sproul perfectly points out, is it doesn't say that everything has to have a cause. It doesn't say that. It says every effect has to have a cause. All right? This is what we do. What we're arguing is, take creation, for example. Take creation as a row of dominoes, okay? So this domino cannot fall unless this domino falls, right? And this domino can't fall until that one does, so on and so forth. Well, when you look at creation as a row of dominoes, we know that creation exists, right? We've all established that. Therefore, we know that this domino has fallen. It's not potential, it's actual. This domino has fallen, which means that domino has fallen, which means that domino has fallen, and so on and so forth. So we know that creation exists, and we know that these have fallen. Here's the question. If we just keep going back, well, what caused this domino to fall? The one before it, and the one before it. If we just keep going back ad infinitum, ad infinity, we know that it's illogical that at some point, the very first domino fell on its own. We know that that's illogical, right? Because every effect requires what? A cause. But wait a minute. That first domino also required a cause. So how can this first domino be the cause and the effect? That violates the law of contingency, does it not? So what did we determine that the initial cause must be what? It has to be outside of itself. Because if it isn't, that's what? Illogical. So when you look at the very first domino that fell, the cause of that very first effect, whatever that is, Big Bang Theory, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. Whatever that looks like, when that first domino fell, we know that that falling is an effect. And the effect must come from where? Outside of itself. That means that that first domino cannot have caused itself to fall. So which means what? What have we argued so far in creation? We've argued that creation must have what? A cause? That cause is then necessary. And that cause must be what? Outside of itself. So when you look at this, do you see the case we're building for theism? Right now, the someone or the something that has caused all the effects so far has to be all these things. He has to be the cause, or it has to be the cause. It has to be necessary. And it has to be outside of itself. Let's talk about one more. One more characteristic of this someone. Let's take the universe here, because I think this is the best one, because it encompasses everything. The universe here, it existed at one point, right? Is it logical? Can we have this? Can we have the cause after the effect? Can the cause come after the effect? Think about the boiling water. Can the water boil before you turn the heat on? Why not? And again, you don't have to think hard about it. This isn't a trick question. It's logic. Law, that's right. The law of causality says that the cause must come before or precede what? The effect. I didn't say that. The laws of creation say that.
Just observable.
It's observable. That's right. Right? This is where natural theology comes. You can observe this. This is not difficult. You see this every day. So, must the cause come before the effect? Must it? It has to, right? Yeah. So, in order for this first domino to fall at the very, very beginning, what must the first cause come before? It can't come here. It can't come here. Where must it come? It must precede all effects, which means this being must be what?
In the beginning.
And it isn't in the beginning, it is. Or excuse me, it will be, right? And not it is that it was. It has to have existed before this point. This is why in John 1:1, it makes it very clear that in the beginning, the Word was. Because before the beginning, God already existed here. So you start to see the nature of the one that is the someone that created this. What do we know about the nature of this someone? He is the cause. He is necessary. He must be outside of creation. Has to be outside of creation. Because if he's not, nothing else in creation makes sense. We've just lost all logic. And the next thing we know is this person, this thing, whatever it is, we don't know that it's God yet, but we can at least deduce logically that this someone must be eternal. Now here's what they're going to say. Well, if God caused the earth, we don't know what caused God, and according to your law, somebody has to cause God. But again, I take you back. It says every effect must have a cause. What is the word effect? What do we define the word effect as? Something that came into existence. Something that's created, right? So what is God not? God is not an effect. God is not an effect. What is God? A cause.
That's why it's a worthless pursuit, all those people with the particle accelerators looking for the God particle that started everything, that started everything. Well, we're looking for a particle, for something that was an effect. as a cause.
That's right.
And they'll never want it. All those millions of dollars for nothing. Billion.
So we know, up to that point, that because God is not an effect, to Andrew's point earlier, we know that the nature of this person, thing, whatever that is, must also be an uncaused cause. He's uncaused because he's what? He has to be eternal. This is the only logical deduction. You cannot logically deduce that he's not eternal because he has to precede all effects, right? He has to be the uncaused cause because he's eternal. And in order to get that first domino to fall, this is important. Whatever or whoever causes this first domino to fall has to have the power in and of himself to lend the power to get that first domino to fall. To get creation to come. Remember, everything's contingent, right? The universe is contingent. It's contingent upon a cause that's outside of itself, a cause that's necessary, a cause that is eternal, and a cause that's uncaused cause. Why? Because this, whoever this is here, has to have the power in and of himself to lend the power to cause the first act of the universe. It's a lot to take in, I understand. So what do we know about the nature of this something? When you take it all back, when you look at the nature of this something, okay, we know that he has to be eternal. Logically, this isn't a religious claim, right? This is a metaphysical claim. He has to be. He's got to precede all effects, right? What's the next one? He's got to be the cause. What else? He's necessary. Why is he necessary? Because what happens if we remove the cause? What happens to the effect? Nothing. It ceases to exist. And what else? He has to be an uncaused caused. Why does he have to be uncaused?
Because then he'll become an effect.
That means he would become an effect. And God did not come into creation. He's not an effect. So he has to be an uncaused cause. Now, here's what's very important. Remember, what are we arguing from? Reason. We're arguing from reason. Is it unreasonable when you follow the law of causality? Is it unreasonable to deduce that whoever this something is that caused existence, is it unreasonable or reasonable to believe he's eternal? It's reasonable. Why is it reasonable? Because he has preceded all what? Creation or effects. That's right.
Well, do we have to understand him and understand how all that worked to understand that it has to be there?
Not yet. Good question. Hold that for next week. That's a very good question, actually. So, from a logical perspective, we can logically and reasonably deduce he has to be eternal. Okay? Do we then obviously have to acknowledge that he is the cause? Yes. Every effect has to have a cause. This is a must. So we know that when you sort of look at this, obviously this is absurd. But when you look at this is just as absurd. Because they're saying, well, no, nothing caused it. It just self-existed. The effects of creation have no cause. What does that violate? The law of causality. Everything we just talked about. So this is a one-way ticket just as much as this is to absurdity.
That's why the scientists, the physicists go nutty trying to figure out the Big Bang, because you gotta have the cause.
Yes, exactly right. It's exactly right. So we have looked at so far, this is the nature. This is the nature of the God that's evident. Is he necessary? Of course he is, logically. Because we take away the cause, the effect does not exist or ceases to exist. So he's absolutely necessary. And he's the uncaused cause because God is not an effect. Whoever that God is, or whoever that thing is, we haven't established it yet, but whoever that is cannot be what? Dependent. He has to be independent. He has to be the uncaused initial cause. And by the way, this is where we get the term aseity or aseity of God. This is where...
And empathy.
And empathy, exactly right. Because whoever this is has to be self-existent, but not as an effect. Self-existent as a cause. But also, remember, we went over this list here. We went over this list. Can any one of these things, maybe Dave, but who knows? Any one of these things, can they sustain themselves? No, because we all die, right? Can we create ourselves? No, we all require something to come into existence, right? So when you look at this, what sustains all these things must also come from where? Outside of itself. Again, this is where we get that word aseity. That whoever this is has to be self-existent. It's the only logical outcome. And self-sustaining. Again, we haven't gotten to this point yet. We're still here. So what we've shown today is that there has to be, according to the law of physical principles, there has to be something that has caused creation to exist. Which means, you see what we've done to these other two views? This isn't our opinion. Again, this is not a religious claim. This is a physical principle claim. It cannot come from nothing. It cannot create itself. That means the creation came from within. That's absurd. We've never seen that in all creation. And we know that this is even more absurd because you cannot have an uncaused effect. It's impossible. Good.
It's just so, you know, it's just so important with Moses, the burning bush. I mean, there's the burning bush, there's an effect with no cause. And he's like, who should I tell him? I am that I am.
Yeah.
He's trying to say, I am this.
Yeah.
And he's using the physical, like laws. But I am the one that has to be outside of all things.
And again, you use the right word. Has to be. That's not a biblical claim. I can't stress that enough. That's not a biblical claim. That's not a religious assertion. That is an assertion that we live in and are governed by in creation, right? We can't make water boil apart from heat. You can't use anything else other than heat. Questions on the law of causality and contingency as it relates to the cosmological argument using natural theology to prove theism to show that something caused creation to exist. Questions on that? Or anybody want to add anything?
Well, you'll observe, and it's probably occurred to people's minds, that although these things are outside of Scripture, because it's all natural, Scripture will support all these things. For instance, in Him, in Christ, all things consist. All things are held together. So He has to be outside all things, and He can't be a thing to hold all things together.
That's right.
Those are principles that are in the Scripture that will support.
That's why Christ has to be apart from creation, right? Because if not, you've violated the law of causality, right? Because if Christ was in creation, that means the creation is sustaining itself.
Right.
That's impossible. So again, not a biblical claim, not a religious claim. That's a normal metaphysical claim, right? Anybody else?
If we turn to the self-existent model of the current universe, we just want to use it positive for many years. That's essentially one and the same as pantheism, because pantheism or whatever, where you have God and creation are muddled, they're mixed together. But that's illogical because it's sort of absurd.
Yeah, very much so. You're exactly right. Exactly right. Anybody else? All right, Peyton, close us up in prayer, please.